I want you to know that your grassroots is active in learning and applying the principles of influence. We want to do what it takes, not to stand at the outside and simply criticize, but to engage our public leaders. So today I would like publicly to thank Governor Josh Green, who has allowed two of his most significant staff members to come here today and to explain the Green Economic Plan. Thank you. We believe that it's very important to have high integrity in everything we research and comment on. And so we want you to hear firsthand what these gentlemen have to say. Would you give a big hand to Louis Salavera and Seth Colby as they come up to the stage with me? I'll be introducing them in a moment, but first, let our cameramen and others queue up as we prepare for our seminar. Team, are we all set to begin? Just need a cue from David Patterson. Sean? Very good. If you've been following the work of Grassroots Institute, you know we have a project called Why We Left Hawaii. That chronicles the stories of people who have moved out of the state. Thousands of Hawaii residents have fled to the mainland over the past 6 years to escape Hawaii's high cost of living. Statistics also show that even native Hawaiians are moving out of Hawaii. Did you know that more than half of all native Hawaiians have left Hawaii and are living on the mainland now? And the fundamental reason is the price of paradise. The cost of living, everything from housing to taxes and so forth, is rising. That's why Governor Josh Green's Green Affordability Plan is a welcome message from government. We actually commend the governor for making that a high priority. And that's why we're going to look at that today. There are many aspects of the Green Affordability Plan that we praise, and we have published that praise, and we commend the governor for a sweeping plan that Hawaii has not seen in many, many years, if ever. At the same time, we have made suggestions, friendly suggestions, as to how the plan could be better. Critical suggestions as fellow members of the state of Hawaii who care about our future. We're very glad that we're able to have with us some of the governor's key advisors today to help us examine that. What exactly would the Green Affordability Plan do? That's a key question that we're going to answer today. And how much would it cost? Would the offset between taxes and credits actually work out? I want to give these gentlemen an opportunity to put their case on the table. But at the same time, I want to invite everyone here to participate in a question and answer session so that we can really understand it. Seth Colby, so glad you're here with us today, is a tax research and planning officer, the tax research and planning officer with the Hawaii Department of Taxation. That's a role that he's held since 2017. Prior to that, he spent several years researching economic development in Latin American countries. He also spent 4 years working with the Peace Corps in El Salvador. Seth did his undergrad work at UC Davis. He's got a master's and PhD in economics from Johns Hopkins University. Give Seth a big hand, and I will let you say some words of welcome.
Aloha. Thank you very much for having us, and I look forward to presenting the Green Affordability Plan.
We're very grateful to Seth for being with us on the island of Maui yesterday for a similar gathering at the Maui Cultural Center. So thank you very much, Seth. Appreciate it. Louis Salavera is the director of the State Department of Budget and Finance. That's a position he took over from Craig Hirai in January. He brings more than 30 years of experience in the public and private sector. Before taking his position with the Department of Budget and Finance, Louis was Senior Director of Government Affairs for the law firm Ashford and Ryston. And before that, from 2014 to 2018, you'll remember this, he was the head of the Department of Business and Economic Development here in Hawaii. Louis is a local boy. He's lived in Hawaii all his life. He graduated from UH Manoa with degrees in economics and political science. And in his new role as Budget and Finance Director, he's in charge of putting together the governor's budget proposal. We're also grateful to Louis and his team for having worked with Grassroots Institute in providing us information on the governor's plan before it was published. Please welcome Louis Salaveria.
Aloha. Looking forward to having a wonderful and healthy dialogue with everyone here.
We're looking forward to hearing from you. This is going to be our format today. I'm going to invite Seth to speak for about 10 minutes. And in that time, to take a 3,000-page document and explain it in Cliff's Notes version. Later on, you can ask him for detail. I think he understands his plan so well that hearing it from the horse's mouth will give us a great understanding. Then, after Seth has done that, I want to ask Louis to continue for another 10 minutes or so to help us understand the feasibility. We're very concerned about the cost of the tax plan. Does the state really have enough money this year and in future years to provide a tax reduction? Is this going to work? After that, I'm going to ask my own questions of these two gentlemen and then open it up to all of you. So take some notes and jot down your question because we're eager to have you participate in the question and answer. So right now, please give a big hand to Seth Colby again, and the microphone is yours. Could you kind of talk close to it?
Yeah. Okay. Aloha, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to present this very ambitious plan by the governor. So just to let you, just give you a little bit of more background about who I am. I am the Tax Research and Planning Officer, and I manage the Tax Research and Planning Office. There is an office within the Department of Taxation that is not
volume.
really, a little closer, yeah? Okay. All right, yeah, I can take this out. Is that better? Okay, perfect. Thank you for the feedback. There is an office within the Department of Taxation that does most of the economic analysis on taxes. We have access to all the tax records in the state, which is some of the most richest economic data that we have. And what we do is we use that data to produce statistical reports. We consult with the governor, legislatures, other decision makers about how their proposals, and we provide economic analysis on that, right? So we work a lot with macroeconomic forecasting, and we work a lot with the legislature. So in that capacity, when the governor was elected, one of the major things he wanted to do was come up with a tax initiative, right? And what happens oftentimes is a legislature, or in this case the governor, comes and says, these are my priorities, this is what I'm thinking about, these are my priorities, what do you think? And then we sit down with them and then we help them think things through, and we provide a little bit of robust economic analysis on that. Over the course of that dialogue, the governor came and proposed the plan that I'm going to present to you today, which is affectionately known as GAP. It's the Green Affordability Plan. It is not an environmental plan. It is in the name of the Governor Green. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. And I'm going to go quick. I mean, I've been given now probably 9 minutes to overview one of the most... Eight. Okay. One of the most comprehensive tax initiatives in the history of the state. But essentially, what we're trying to do is we're trying to alleviate the cost, some of the cost burden that Hawaii taxpayers face. One of the things that a huge source of cost of living for most people is our taxes, right? And so what we're doing is we're trying to have a strategic way of disseminating taxes in a way that's, one, supports families that are struggling, and be economically robust. So right now, what you see is that is a chart of the number of tax credits along different income spectrums, right? So the part on the farthest right, my right, your left, is the lowest end of the income spectrum, and on the right is the highest end of the income spectrum. And what you'll see, those are existing tax credits that focuses on social welfare. What you'll see is most of our tax credits go to the lowest income individuals, which is appropriate, right? We have a social safety net and we target that. However, there's a large concern about what a lot of people in Hawaii call the ALICE population, which is asset limited income constrained, which are basically working families, right? That don't qualify or they're above the federal poverty line, but are having a hard time. Now you can imagine if you have a family of 4 and you make $50,000 a year, you're above the federal poverty line, but it would be very difficult to educate your children, rent a house, do all that. So what we've done is the governor and we worked together, constructed a tax plan that would address this. And by the way, this is a very long presentation. It's comprehensive. I'm going to give it to the Grassroots Institute so you guys can all have this. And I'm going to skip over a bunch of slides in brevity, but you can use this as a resource. And essentially what we're doing is we're focusing on 4 different segments. One, we're focusing on the people at the lowest income quartiles. The people who are already receiving the tax credits are going to receive more tax credits under this plan. Then we're going to offer more income support through tax initiatives to the people in the middle income of the spectrum that are really struggling here in Hawaii. And then they're going to do something that's slightly different, but it's very important. What I think is it's through the Child Independent Care Tax Credit, right? And this really focuses on child care. So one of the major issues for all families is child care has gone up much higher than the average cost of inflation, and it is a huge determinant, particularly for women entering into the workforce, or staying in the workforce. So, for example, I'll go over this I'll go over this now since I'm going fast. We've all heard the statistic that 70% of the women make 70% of men in terms of income, right? That when you look at somebody, it's not normally, according to the studies, it's not normally because a boss looks at a woman who looks like a man, decides to pay them 30% less. What happens is a woman. Typically it's women, it's not always women, but typically it's women. When they have children, they drop out of the workforce or are more likely to drop out of the workforce. So during the COVID, female labor participation decreased. Now, if anybody has a 7-year gap on the resume, that's going to hurt their overall professional career and hurt their overall lifetime earnings. So this is an attempt to really encourage women and or at least give the women, and not always women, it can be men too, right? So I want to be gender neutral, but traditionally it is because of our social norms in our society, often it is females, that really encourage labor force participation. And so if we can increase labor force participation within Hawaii, that would really boost economic growth. And then we're boosting, helping our teachers through their supply credit, or teacher supply credit, so they can buy supplies for their classrooms. All told, this is a list of all the tax initiatives. It's pretty comprehensive. All told, it's about $315 million. To put that in perspective, that was about the cost of the constitutional refund that went out last year. So we can talk more about that going forward. Now, I'm going to skip all the way down here to see this graph that we saw this again. Now, what happens if the entirety of the GAP plan was passed? It's this, right? So what you see is these are all the individual tax credits in all the individual initiatives. And what you can see, and they're color-coded by the different initiatives, right? So I just want to highlight a couple things that are going on there. One is the people in the lowest income end of the income spectrum are benefiting immensely, right? Their income support through the tax system goes up by 4, a magnitude of 4. And then what also is happening is we are supporting a lot of people in this in this very difficult zone to be in Hawaii. You know, families of four, and this is for joint filers with a family, 2 children. The people in the kind of like the middle income of the spectrum, you know, the people who are making between $50,000 to $150,000 jointly, right? So that would be 2 teachers, senior teachers would make $150,000 collectively, right? So we're not talking about high income earners, but we are really supporting these people. So, and the other thing I do want to highlight is different tax credits and different elements support different aspects of the income spectrum, right? So one of the things that has been levied against, or one of the critiques of the Green Affordability Plan is it's very complicated. However, Hawaii's economy is incredibly complex. We have 1.4 million people live here, 750,000 taxpayers, and each one of you is a taxpayer, and you have an individual story, right? So you need to use a number of different policy levers to get to what different societal elements, and that is what the Green Affordability Plan does. I think I'll stop there and go to the next slide. So what you can see on this slide is this is the monetary impact for a family of 4 if the Green Affordability Plan in its entirety would pass. So what you see is these are quintiles, income quintiles, and what you can see is for the lowest 2 quintiles, they're receiving more than $2,000 extra in income a year. Right? So that is an additional paycheck for these people. This is significant income support, like life-changing income support. What you'll also see is everybody in Hawaii, every single taxpayer will see some kind of tax reduction in this plan. However, it is focused on certain elements of our society, right? So the lower the income, usually, especially proportional to their income, the bigger the tax savings. This is just another way of showing how progressive our tax system is currently, and this is for all Hawaii taxes, right? This is for the GET, includes the individual income tax, and what you see is lower income people, this is a percentage of their income, pay less, and then it goes up and to the right? And this is what we expect, this is what in public finance goes ability to pay. There's generally an assumption that people with higher incomes have more ability to pay a greater percentage of their income to support societal needs, and that is exactly what we have in Hawaii. However, I'm showing 2 different things. The impact of 2 different policy proposals that are on the docket for this year. One is exempting food and drugs from GET. That is the dotted line up top. So you see that such an initiative would benefit taxpayers, Hawaii taxpayers, a little bit, but the Green Affordability Plan is much more effective. Why is that? That's because when we're talking about individual income tax, residents pay 92% of our individual income tax, whereas in the GET, 30% of that is paid by non-residents. So we already have something right there. Again, this is just showing the impact of the different plans in absolute terms, right? So you can see that on the lower end side that you're going to start to remit. They would actually get more money from the government than they're actually paying in, but it would benefit every single income level. So just 2 more slides and I'll be done. I know you're making me nervous already. So like as an economist, I just want to help share with how I think of the plan, right? Because there's different elements of this plan. So first of all is updating the tax code, right? One of the things that we're doing is Hawaii is one of the few states that does not have does not index their income tax to inflation, right? So at the federal level, you have this thing called COLA, which is a cost of living adjustment, and every year you do that. Hawaii does not have that. So what happens is like, I work for the state, right? So sometimes I get a cost of living adjustment. It's not a raise, it's a cost of living adjustment, but I get bumped up into a higher tax bracket every single year, right? And that is not the intention of the cost of living adjustment, right? So one of the big initiatives here is actually creating an indexation link that would allow our tax code to adjust to prices over time. And now this has a small impact year to year because most people get a cost of living adjustment of 1% to 2%, but over the next 30 or 40 years, it's quite significant. I would argue it's one of the most revolutionary parts of this bill. Just to put this in perspective, Before they had the highest, they inserted the 9, 10, 11% income brackets in the state of Hawaii. 8.25 was the highest income bracket. For a single filer, that goes into effect at $48,000. Now, most people wouldn't think $48,000 is correct for the highest income brackets. So how did we get there? The answer to that is in the 1980s, $50,000 was a great salary. But they've lagged in updating all those things. So one of the initiatives is we're going to insert this so our tax system can adjust to prices over time. We're also going to update the standard deduction and the personal exemption, which we can talk about this. There's a million different levers within the tax code, and you can get to the same point doing different things, but we're going to update that. Then there's also the redistribution part, right? And so this is a political choice, but Hawaii is a very progressive state, and they really care about people who are struggling in the lower income classes, right? So these tax credits, the food excise tax credit, the EITC, which is the earned income tax credit, the renter's credit, these are designed to really support people who are in need most. Then you have the child and dependent care credit, which I talked a lot about, which is really focusing on a sector that really reflects changing norms and societal behavior within our society. So we have higher levels of workforce participation by all members of the family, and figuring out how we can support those people as we're making that transition and more people are working in the workforce. And then we're focusing on teachers. So those are kind of like the broad elements of that. I just want to share where the Green Affordability Plan is in terms of the legislature right now, right? So all these elements were included in one bill and proposed by the governor in HB 1049. Has as they've gone through the committees, they've been divided up into 3 different bills. One is HB 954, which has the EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit, for it doesn't say how much right now, but it's in there, as well as the standard deduction, personal exemption, and inflation indexation. Then there is another bill for the food and excise tax credit, which is starting to be geared less as a credit, but more as a one-time way of distributing the constitutional refund over and over again to people below a certain income threshold. And then the third is HB 1049, where they kept the rest of the tax credits. So that is a super whirlwind view of the Green Affordability Plan. I welcome all of your questions in the future. I intentionally left a lot of things open, and I am happy to discuss the specifics going forward.
Thank you, Seth. I really appreciate that concise presentation. And we know that you were put under the gun in terms of the amount of time. Later on, I'm going to invite all of our audience members here today to ask whatever questions they have. But first, I'd like to hear from Louis on the feasibility of this. Louis, we're looking at something that is supposed to balance tax credits, a good number of them, admittedly, from Seth, a bit complicated, along with tax deductions. And the bottom line question is, does the state, over the next several years, now and in the future, have enough money to result in that net savings to the individual taxpayer? And one thing I'd appreciate it if you'd address, you've come into your office at a unique time in Hawaii's history, one in which our legislators are using a term that we don't really like to use that much at Grassroots Institute, but many of our legislators are saying we're facing a record surplus. We have all of this money. We've got $2 billion available to us now. How feasible is it to regard that money as a surplus? How much is the Green Affordability Plan relying on it? And do you have any concerns about that as well? So just to be concise in what I'm asking, I'd appreciate it if you'd address what Seth has presented in terms of the feasibility.
Thank you, Kelly, and again, thank you everybody for the opportunity to talk about this very, very ambitious plan. And to start off, yes, it's a very unique, particular situation. The last time I was in this role, was in 2010 when I was the deputy of the Department of Budget and Finance. And back then we were facing a budget deficit of negative $200 million when we were coming in. And now I come into the particular role and there's a ending balance of about $2 billion. And so the terminology surplus insinuates that there's no need for that money. I like to use the term ending balance because there's absolutely a significant amount of need that that money can be used for, whether it's in government service, whether it's providing the type of tax breaks that is needed for our residents and bringing down essentially the cost of living for everybody in the state of Hawaii. So to answer the question on whether or not this can be afforded, simply yes. And in fact, I will go as far as to say is that we can't afford not to do it. Because really, what we're sitting on right now are unhealthy ending balances. When you're growing ending balances, if you own a business and you see that you're just sitting on cash and all you're doing is sitting on cash, you're not putting that money to work, whether it's in increasing government services or whether it's providing tax relief. It is not the intention of government to sit on cash, because that really means that we're not doing the public service that we should be doing, and that is being fiduciarily responsible to the people of the state of Hawaii. So that's my very short answer on whether or not we can afford this plan or not.
Well, I appreciate your brevity, so I'll use some of your 10 minutes and kind of follow up on that just a little bit. I'm not sure that I heard from you precisely how the Green Affordability Plan is going to pay for itself. For example, are the governor and the legislature looking at tax hikes to pay for it? Or are they thinking of the estimated surplus? What was the alternative word you used for surplus?
Ending balance.
The estimated ending balance would cover the cost? Or are they perhaps thinking that a tax cut might pay for itself by generating greater economic activity as businesses put their money back into investment and the economy improves and so forth? So can you kind of parse out exactly how that revenue will be generated to make this very ambitious plan pay for itself?
Sure, again, in kind of keeping it relatively light, not going into like, you know, the nitty gritty of what the financial plan looks like. If you look at the financial plan is a 6-year projection that the state uses in expected general fund revenues. That is not a number that we come up with. That is a number that is provided to us by the Council on Revenues. So when you look at that projection and that growth of the financial plan, when we first started and when we first came into the administration, we were expecting, even with the initial budget that was proposed, an ending balance for the current fiscal year of about $1.9 billion. That was going to grow to 2.8, then 4.2, 5.8, 7.6, 10, and then $12.6 billion by the end of the financial plan. Granted, we only budget in 2-year cycles. That's the way, you know, the legislature operates, and that's the way that government funds it. So we have an opportunity at this time and at this juncture to make these kind of adjustments into our tax structure and our tax code that can basically live on for as long as we want it to. You know, there are structural changes that we're making to the tax code, such as doing the inflationary index, which I think Seth really explained very easily. But then there are also credits, that at some point in time, if we don't need it, maybe it's not necessary anymore. Or if we do need it, we can continue to keep on going forward. You know, there are several different like government financing principles that come to light when it comes to you know, tax credits, subsidies, and everything starts off as a credit, where it becomes essentially something that you're trying to do to support or to incentivize a particular behavior in a particular business. That credit or that incentive becomes a subsidy. And then at some point in time, maybe that subsidy turns into an entitlement. We never want to get into a position where people feel that they're continually entitled to a particular thing, because what we want to do is really just lower the cost of living in the state of Hawaii. If we can start doing that, and if we can start creating much more discretionary income amongst individuals, especially that Alice community in there, that's the kind of economic activity, that's the kind of expenditure and productivity that we want in order to grow the economic pie in the state of Hawaii. So, as the plan currently exists right now, there is no better, more opportune time to actually take a look at our current tax code and make these kind of adjustments going forward. So, because we budget on 2-year cycles, right? Every year that you delay looking at making these types of adjustments, there are other things that the state has to do. There are going to be other expenses that are going to keep on coming forward. You know, we have collective bargaining adjustments that need to get factored in, everything going forward. Whatever you do when you're looking at the financial plan over a 6-year period, you're thinking about all of the different things that you're going to have to spend for, not just in this current year, but essentially in the next 4 years after the current budget cycle. So what we want to do is basically take the opportunity while we have it right now, make the adjustments to the tax code, and get that statutorily included in our laws.
Thank you, Louis. Seth, you want to add to that?
I think it helps to provide some background to the story. And the whole story is COVID.
Yeah.
Right? So prior to the pandemic, tax revenues make up roughly 50% of our budget,
yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yes.
So we, prior to the pandemic, we were collecting about $7.2 billion. This year we're projected to collect 9.8. So there was a 30%, we had a little dip, but there was a 30% increase in tax collections at the level of the state, right? So I feel like there's a lot of like just general feeling, which I totally get, which is we don't have enough money. Like we have to raise taxes, like the money has to come from somewhere. But the pandemic really changed the fundamental aspect of Hawaii's budgetary thing, and this is not unique to Hawaii.
Yeah.
Every single state is dealing with how to deal with a huge budgetary surplus. And so that is why it's a different game than it was prior to the pandemic. And I think a lot of people, even legislatures, a lot of people have not internalized how much extra money the states and all states are receiving as a result of this pandemic.
I think we're going to want to ask you something about that later on, but let's go back before we get too far away from what Louis said. Seth, I'd like your input on this. Tax policy, as all economic policy, has a psychological aspect to it. It affects human behavior. And some of the concerns people have expressed about the Green Affordability Plan is that it may be subject to something called tax cliffs or benefit cliffs, where people reach a certain threshold and then they're incentivized to stop working, to work less in order to enhance their bottom line receipt of funds. Now, has that been factored into the tax plan for the Green Affordability Plan, and how would you address that?
So at the very beginning, when this plan was designed in 2 weeks, and at the very beginning there were tax cliffs, but after thoughtful feedback from the UH economic professors and other people, we addressed those, so there are no tax cliffs in the plan anymore. So the way you avoid a tax cliff is you have a gradual rollout, right? So, if you get $200 of tax credit when you make $50,000, we don't want to take all $200 away from you if you make $50,001, right? So what we do is, instead of getting the person who makes $50,001 will get $199. So there are no tax cliffs in this plan.
I'd like to chat with you about that a little bit later on, and I appreciate the fact that you're sending it to us to look at. But Louis, let me get back to you. In places where we have studied various tax credits, they're oftentimes susceptible to fraud or even to just confusion amongst individuals, so that they're ignorant of the advantage that they can take and so forth. How would that be handled with the Green Affordability Plan?
interestingly enough, when you do make such significant changes in tax policy and in the tax code, yes, you're going to have instances where individuals will try to take advantage of it. But one, it shouldn't preclude us from trying to make those changes anyway. The compliance and the enforcement of, or the enforcement and ensuring compliance with the tax code is just something that just needs to happen, regardless whether or not you make changes or if you keep it the same. But for us going forward, I think, when we make these types of changes, what we need to do is we need to be much more, we need to communicate it better to the general public. We want people to kind of understand, even when we were kind of debating this thing, and Seth and I, and he's not giving himself enough credit for putting together the most comprehensive plan that the state has ever kind of embarked on in taxes, like literally in 2 weeks and stuff. But how we communicate this out to the general public? How do we tell people, like, one, do you want to wait till you actually file your taxes and just get a larger tax rebate? Or do you, two, want to increase your withholding so you get a larger paycheck every time you get paid? So I think, one, fraud, I hate to say it, fraud's going to happen when fraud's going to happen. I mean, if somebody wants to rob your house, they're going to try and rob your house. But it shouldn't stop us from trying to make the changes to the tax code. But to get people to understand how these changes are, and it's not a plug for TurboTax, but if you use TurboTax, these adjustments and these changes will probably already be in the program when you actually start filing your taxes next year. So I think that that we got to give people a little bit more credit, and one, we also have to be better at communicating how people can utilize these credits to ensure that they get a larger paycheck.
Thank you. Another concern, and I'll direct this to Seth, is what's going on in the economy. From a consumer point of view, we're concerned about the cost of housing. We're concerned about the Fed and the rising interest rates. Bottom line, there are a lot of economic forecasters who are talking about the looming recession. And that's not just going to affect us as consumers, it affects us as taxpayers, both businesses and individuals, so that will affect the revenues of the state. Seth, if I could ask you to use your crystal ball as an economist, tell us what to expect in the economy and how that will affect the affordability of the Green Affordability Plan.
Sure. Okay, so the way economists think about the future is they think about the future in terms of probabilities, right? So, yeah, Korea might send a nuclear bomb over to us, but what's the probability of that? And if it's true, then why aren't you guys taking money out of your 401ks and everything right now, right? So we do expect, there are things that we do not understand. We're in a very precarious time in terms of financial fragility, in terms of our banking system, in terms of inflationary period. We're also seeing this huge boost, we could see a huge boost from artificial intelligence in terms of productivity. We just don't know, right? So what we as economists do is we put all those things down into probabilities, and then we sum those all up and we come up with a forecast. The consensus forecast of most economists is for a mild recession in the United States. How does that translate to Hawaii? We expect an even more mild recession here within Hawaii. Why is that? One is because a lot of the industries that are being most severely impacted are relatively small and not big parts of the Hawaii economy. We are also, the return of foreign visitors is going to mitigate some of that impact. So that's what we're doing. In terms of affordability of how that affects affordability of the green plan, I would defer to Louis on that because BNF is in charge of doing
Financial plan.
Stress tests.
Yep. So to Seth's point, we are constantly looking at the financial plan, and we're constantly looking at the ending balances. We've gone as far, and we were actually even projecting, earlier, when the Council on Revenues met in January, we thought that they were actually going to go lower because of the constitutional rebate that happened last year, which actually cost more than the tax plan right now. That constitutional rebate in the financial plan actually costed $328 million. And if I'm not mistaken, the green affordability plan in its first year only cost 312 or 315. So we're constantly stress testing the financial plan. You know, the most recent Council on Revenue's update did make some adjustments to the overall balance. So now our overall balance, assuming everything that the governor in the green affordability plan goes through, assuming a $500 million sock away into the emergency budget reserve fund, assuming $1 billion worth of additional funding for the rental housing trust fund and the dwelling unit revolving fund in order to build affordable housing, we are still within the parameters of where the financial plan should be. A structurally sound financial plan should be approximately carryover-wise, when you look at hard reserves and your carryover balance, about 20% of your general fund revenue each year. So if you look at where we're at right now, we should be probably carrying over at any given point in time $2 billion. Right now we have $1 billion in the emergency budget and reserve fund. Governor Green is proposing to put another $500 million into the emergency budget reserve fund. And then we can start moving, including all of the things and the green affordability plan that we have right now, into an ending balance of around $500 million. Then you get to having a very structurally sound and mindful financial plan for the state of Hawaii. And that's what we're striving for right now, Kaylee.
Well, Louis and Seth, thank you very much for the presentation. I think you've laid it out clearly where the governor's plan is. I'm sure many of you have questions, and I want to invite you to come up to this microphone over here, if you would, so that your questions can be recorded as part of the program. And as you're walking up, may I invite you, please, to cooperate, as our speakers have, by being concise and direct. Please, no debates, no speeches, but questions. If you would just come straight forward and ask your question, introduce yourself, and then ask your question. We'll have time for everyone who can do that, and I appreciate it very much. Please introduce yourself and ask your question. Aloha.
Carl Choi. So you talked about a financial plan. Can you remind me how much unfunded liability we have? Is it 30 billion now?
We have, between the ERS and the EUTF, approximately $30 billion of long-term liability.
So this financial plan doesn't consider 30 billion of debt or unfunded liability?
The financial plan assumes that we are continuing to amortize the long-term liability of the state of Hawaii by making our annual required contributions. So just like a mortgage. So what happens is,
But the fund's not current, right? I mean, you guys are underfunded by like, what, 30, 35%?
We're underfunded, but the ERS, the state's pension, is basically it's 65% funded ratio right now.
So even if you make your annual contributions like you're supposed to, you're still going to be 35% underfunded?
No, that is incorrect.
How are you going to catch up?
The current pension accumulation, as well as what we are contributing in our annual required contributions, includes a pay down of the unfunded liability. So what we do, and what the unfunded, it's a mortgage, essentially. We are paying more than what is expected to just pay out. We're paying the pension accumulation for the people that are currently receiving pensions. We're also paying for the individuals that are currently employed and their vested interest that's going forward. And we're also paying down the unfunded liability portion that still needs to be made up. And here's the thing, like when it comes to the ERS and even the EUTF, the EUTF back in 2010 had zero corpus. It had a zero corpus. We were a pay-go. That means every retiree, it doesn't matter, we were paying their pension, and we were not starting to basically put money aside so that when that individual retired, that the corpus of the EUTF would just pay for their benefit going forward. Now we have about $6 billion in that corpus that started back in about 2014. And so what the state is trying to do, and what the state is doing very, very well, is actually starting to pay down that unfunded liability. But we can't pay for it all at once. That would be a little silly, actually. So what we got to do is we have agreed, and the rating agencies of the Standard & Poor's, the Moody's, and the Fitches of the world understand, and this is not unique to just Hawaii, this is every state. Because one, if you'd, and this is a very long-winded answer, but this is something that I've been involved with very, very much, is that when you look at medical cost trends, right, you have to cover those medical costs for that retiree going forward. So you need to start socking money away now, and that's what we're trying to do. We're paying for the retirees that are there. We're paying for the vested interest of an existing employee that's not a retiree yet, and we're also paying down the unfunded liability portion of that benefit. So it is included in the plan. The pay down and the amortization of that debt is included in the financial plan.
And just one quick question for Seth. Can you explain the economic theory of spending more money that's going to then reduce inflation and the cost of living for us?
Okay, so a couple things. We're not spending more money, right? Either the state's going to spend the money or you're going to spend the money, right? So inflation is about creating money, and the state does not have the ability to create money. That is the role of the federal government, the Federal Reserve, and because we are a balanced budget state, we cannot create more dollars than exist. So I think it's a really great question, but it's a really confusing question because it's one of the things that there's certain things that as a state we need to focus on, and there's another thing that the federal government's going to focus on. Inflation is it really is, apart from just sending out tons of checks to everybody and then going into debt, which we can't do because we're a balanced budget state. Yep. It's inflation really is an issue for the state. That's a federal issue.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up on the earlier question on unfunded liabilities. If we actually calculate at Grassroot Institute unfunded liabilities beyond just the ERS and EUTF, there's a huge amount of infrastructure and so forth, and an economic organization here in Hawaii looked at a figure of $80 to $100 billion. But putting that aside, just a very quick question: do you know how much we have to pay each year in interest on your lower figure, 32 to 35 billion in unfunded liability?
I'm glad I looked up this question earlier.
Just a quick response.
So the quick response: debt service, what we pay for in our bonds. Our bond payments are approximately $1.3 billion a year. That's the interest that we pay on government bonds. But then we have fringe costs, and these are the pension accumulations, our EUTF. That amounts to about $2.3 billion per year that we pay. So if you look, and these are general funds, so if you're making $10 billion a year in revenue of general funds, over a third of that is literally going to fixed cost. So your discretionary, your ability to be discretionary kind of starts to narrow when you start including all of the different other operational expenses that you got to cover.
Thank you, Louis. We have another question here.
Two questions. One is a softball question. This information that you just got in the last 2 weeks, if we could have it during the event, because it's hard to see that, right? So maybe next time you can bring some papers for you. Number two, there is
thank you. We're responsible for that at Grassroots. That's a good suggestion.
okay.
Go ahead with your next.
Second of all, there's some states in the union that are in the black, some are in the red. It seems like all the blue states are in the red. A lot of the states that are in the red are not. They are all Republicans. So I was wondering, do you guys ever study the reasons why these states are in this situation they are financially?
Thank you for the question.
I'm going to attempt to answer this question in a nonpartisan way. So if you look at the particular structures of other governmental budgets, and I'm going to use the example of unfunded liabilities, and our commitment to pay for a vested interest and a vested benefit. By Constitution and by the Supreme Court, we must pay that. There are other states out there that can change the retirement benefit of somebody that has already had a vested. That actually ends up reducing, that fixes their balance sheet. They can go in and they can make adjustments and basically say, you know what, we were paying you $2,000 a month. We're gonna only pay you $1,000 a month now going forward. That's a wonderful, if as a finance person, I would do that, but I am guided by the states and laws of the state of Hawaii, and I don't have that at my disposal. So there are different triggers and levers that other states have that we don't have here.
Thank you very much. Next question. Please, please,
My
Mark.
name's Mark
Thank you.
Monstalco, and welcome. Thank you both for coming today. I'd like to be inclusive, so I'd like to ask a question both candidates. So I'm really confused, and I don't mean this to be a gotcha. If it's inappropriate or complicated, I'm okay with that for an answer. But I don't understand how we could shut down the economy for 18 months, and now we're generating more revenue than we were before the pandemic. Could you give me just a general overview how we got into this situation?
Absolutely. So, several things. We shut down one aspect of the economy that was very important. However, the federal government engaged in high levels of fiscal stimulus.
Yes.
So essentially, it said you don't have to work for 2.5 months. It gave a quarter's worth of the country's GDP back to the citizenry. Right? So that really tied us over. And so what you saw through transfer payments is incomes actually increased during the pandemic. And that offset our income tax was greatly offset by the GET. Now, that's not to say our tax revenues didn't go down, but they just didn't go down as much. So it had a lot to do with the federal interventions.
And just to add on to Seth's, I think during COVID and during that period of time, on average, the state usually brings in about $3 billion worth of federal transfer payments per year. So you figure during those 3 years, that's about $9 billion that the state would have got. $22 billion worth of federal transfer payments came in during that period of time, more than double.
And also they provided explicit budgetary assistance to the states, which we never usually get.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Are we depending on that to continue?
No, we're not. No, we're not.
So
Absolutely not.
Now just our natural growth in revenue has exceeded all the stimulus money that's coming in from the federal government.
Yeah. Yes, and there. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
And sorry. There are a couple of things that did change even prior to the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, I think I see Natalie Iwasa here. Prior to the pandemic, the state used to give the counties a distribution of the transient accommodations tax. Prior to the pandemic, the state removed that and gave the counties their own ability to increase the TAT, and now the state ended up covering that. So that ended up to a tune of almost about $150 million more that the state was getting by making that particular change in the statute. So there were different things that happened during that period of time, and now we're coming out of the pandemic. Tourism is kind of reaching pre-pandemic levels, and now you have this extra infusion of money that wasn't there prior to the pandemic that's going into the general fund. So yes, so there is growth that's happening.
Thank you.
In other areas.
Thank you. I do have one question for you. You mentioned our beginning balance being a significant, ending balance being a significant amount of cash, and also the amount that we're saving for retirement funds. Where's that invested? Is that in like a Silicon Valley bank account, or is there somewhere else?
So the ERS and I invite you to take a look at their webpage and take a look at the way they do. They have and I am a trustee. Their investment strategy and their investment portfolio is extremely complex, much more complex than my simple TD Ameritrade account that I do on my phone from time to time. But their plan is, their portfolio exists in many different types of asset classes, and it's also developed in such a way in order to mitigate risks, because the ERS's responsibility is for a 7% return on investment each year. as anybody that has their own investment portfolio, some years you could have 15, some years you could have 2. But for them, because there's a requirement for cash flow in order to pay for pension payments, they got to keep it in a very, very narrow band. And that's what the portfolio is set up to. But I don't have the individual details. But I can tell you right now, whatever it is, they are extremely protected against major shocks.
Well, thank you very much. We've got about 5 minutes and I would like to fit everyone in. So let's do a rapid fire question and rapid fire answer.
Okay, well, Mark's question was basically mine too, where'd all the money come from? But isn't inflation part of that too, that higher inflation has pushed people to pay more taxes? And that's one. That second one is, in general at the Grassroots Institute, I'm Mark Coleman with the Grassroots Institute, we tend to favor tax cuts instead of tax credits. How did that fit into your equation? And on the subject of tax credits, do you guys have a list of how many tax credits there are? Kind of like all the GET exemptions or something like that. We know how many GET exemptions there are. Do you know how many tax credits there are? Doesn't that get all a bit complicated when a simple tax cut would be a lot more simple?
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, so 2/3 of the Green Affordability Plan is a tax cut and 1/3 are tax credits, right? So you issue a tax credits because they're much more, they're much more narrowly focused and you can target explicit sectors of the economy or sectors of the population, which was very important to the governor. However, 2/3 is cutting the standard, raising the standard deduction, raising the personal exemption is equivalent of a tax cut because you are lowering your taxable income for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question. And again, thank you very much for the brevity. Go, please.
Hi, my name is Terry Shodash.
Hi, Terry.
I'd like to ask governor's representatives here what the governor's stance is on recreational marijuana.
It's up to you, gentlemen.
I'm not appointed.
The governor's stance on recreational marijuana is he will sign whatever comes to his desk.
Okay. Now, do you understand the economic ramifications of recreational marijuana in this state? And if you look at the state of Colorado, look at the economic ramifications and the physical injury ramifications that occurred when Colorado legalized recreational marijuana, and that was 10 years ago. Have you looked at that?
There were definite considerations in terms of what would be the, I guess, costs associated with making.
There's hospital costs as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think that in terms of what's happening throughout the country when it comes to the use of cannabis, that this is a wave that's coming. It's how the state is going to manage this particular wave as it comes here. We already have medical marijuana that exists, but I can tell you that the governor is very concerned when it comes to issues associated with societal costs associated with the use of cannabis.
You realize that the traffic deaths were 150% more in Colorado? You realize hospitalizations were 109% more? Plus, insurance rates went through the roof in Colorado.
I want to thank you for raising the issue. And by the way, Seth and Louis will be around to carry on the discussion. Thank you very much. A couple more questions and we'll close.
My name is Scott Fowler. The question I have for you is, prior to the pandemic, unemployment was 2.9% in Hawaii. Today it's not too far away from that, and yet we have this big void in the workforce. Restaurants are closing, hotels are having hard people. Have you, as part of your calculus, looked at the incentives for keeping people, having people re-enter the workforce? So either people are either left Hawaii or they're here and they remove themselves from the workforce to put us in the situation we're in.
Thank you for your question. Either one.
You want to say it?
Yeah, so we did not do an explicit analysis of labor participation and its impact on the fiscal impact of the bill.
Thank you. And one last question, then we'll summarize after that.
So it's after one, so it really is lightning round. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
My name's David Mulligan. You said that your course, you are ultimately at the state level fiscally constrained because you have to have money. Fair enough. The federal government obviously is not similarly constrained. They can print money, and federal debt keeps exploding. And I have to believe that is a major reason for inflation. And then if you look at the local level, a jurisdiction like your subordinate jurisdictions is spending somewhere between $10 and $12 billion on a rail nowhere, and set aside the wisdom of that, it undoubtedly has its own set of inflationary pressures. Go try to hire a contractor and see what you can do. My question really for you is, I applaud the philosophy of GAP. The question is, do you think ultimately you're pushing against a string?
Thank you very much.
That's probably the hardest of all of the questions. I mean, if you look at where we are right now and the Fed's move, and I think the Fed met today, actually, and they did a quarter point increase. I mean, there's so much pressure with regards to reducing inflation in order to get to Fed to its target rate of what, 2%, I think it was? I forgot what that
2%.
2% target rate. And so, but you're now starting to see kind of the impacts of these interest rate hikes are happening. I mean, arguably, a lot of people can say one of the reasons why Silicon Valley Bank, kind of collapsed was because they were holding on to paper that was at a very, very low interest rate, and now all of a sudden they're sitting on cash and they don't have enough. They didn't have enough to manage the run that ended up happening to it. So, is there headwinds? Are there tailwinds when it comes to what we're trying to accomplish here in the state of Hawaii? We are have historically been, kind of somewhat insulated from what happens in the continental U.S. There were times in our history where when the U.S. was kind of going down, Asia kind of helped picked up the pace for it going forward. That was kind of historically how certain things have happened. I'm not saying that that's going to happen again in the future, but simple joke from an economist perspective, right? A lawyer, an engineer, an economist gets stuck in a hole. Lawyer says, "I'll get us out of here in a couple of days. I'm going to sue the guys who got it." Engineer says, "You know what? Give me a day. I'll build us a ladder. I'll get out of it." Economist says, "I'll get us out of here right now. Assume there's a ladder." That's essentially what we're trying to accomplish.
Very good. Let's give a very big hand to Louis Salaveria and Seth Colby. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here. Thank you. And please take our gratitude back to Governor Green for allowing you to come and providing this transparency. Everybody, I want you to know something. This was a little different than our usual presentation. We wanted to give you a glimpse of the working relationship that we have with our government. We believe that there has to be open communication. We plan to provide Louis and Seth with our feedback in written form with our comments on today's presentation. And we do it in the spirit of hoping that will be helpful to our governor's attempts to lead us in the state. We will also make that available to you in our regular newsletter, so you can read our write-up and analysis of today's presentation, especially if you are signed up to subscribe, as 40,000 other people have done. If you haven't done that, please definitely sign up today and at least fill the card out with your comments and so forth. We believe in getting our research straight from the horse's mouth. And I want you to really understand that we respect tremendously the fact that the governor and his staff were willing to come here today and put on the table exactly how they're thinking and what they have in mind and so forth, and be open to our feedback. I just appreciate that greatly.
Thank you.
I think that together we can make Hawaii a better place. Thank you. On behalf of the Grassroots Institute, I invite you to stay around and experience like-minded fellowship with each other. And until next time, aloha. Fantastic.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.